afternoon. Mr. Speaker, we've just spent the last 20 minutes listening to my very good friend, the Member of Parliament for Jumaku Inyani CM, whose conclusion is that this economy is sick, is in a state of psychosis, and that the measures being introduced by the administration are insensitive. Right, Honorable Speaker, the people of Ghana are looking up to us this afternoon, that at a time that the entire world is coming out of an economic crisis, her leaders, her members of parliament will find common ground to agree on solutions to the economic challenges that the world is going through and Ghana is going through as well. And I want to call on our colleagues on the other side that this debate be characterized by that common national agenda ahead of us. Because if not, and we descend into the old realms of political goal scoring, then we will also be tempted to say to them that the time when the economy was in psychosis was in 2014 when they took us to the IMF. If we do not rally around a common national agenda to find solutions for our people, then we will also be telling them that insensitivity is when a president looks unemployed young people in the face and tells them that he's not a magician, he can't give them jobs. Mr. Speaker, we don't want to go that way today. We want to have a conversation with a national objective ahead of us. We are here today not to even consider estimates. We are here today not to even do appropriations. We are here to consider the economic policy proposal which the administration has put before us. Mr. Speaker, the question before us is whether or not this House will approve the economic policy. And my suggestion is that this House should approve the economic policy proposals that the administration has put here. Mr. Speaker, I say so for 5 reasons that I will outline shortly. Number one is the fact that the most important question on the minds of people of this country, including the young people of this country, is the question of unemployment. Right, Honorable Speaker, I have in my hands here the Afrobarometer study of the Center for Democratic Development, conducted just before the 2020 elections. And it lists the top 3 challenges on the minds of Ghanaians: unemployment, infrastructure, education. Mr. Speaker, the question therefore is, do the economic policy proposals that have been put before us answer the question of unemployment on the hearts and minds of Ghanaians? And I submit to you that the answer is yes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, by the year 2024, 6.6 million young people will be out of school looking for jobs. Any administration that is minded to deal with the challenges of our time will be exploring ways by which it can help ensure that these people get jobs. And that is one of the first considerations that this budget answers. Mr. Speaker, as a matter of fact, the first thing we have done as an administration, indeed as a country, is to expand the Ghanaian economy. By 2016, when the immediate past administration was leaving power, growth had come to as low as 3.4%. What that means is that the rate at which the Ghanaian economy was expanding, so that private sector could expand and create more jobs, was down to 3.4%. Right, Honorable Speaker, until COVID hit us, we were growing at an average of 7% year on year. An average of 7% year on year. What that meant was that a lot of young people had the opportunity to get jobs in the private sector. Mr. Speaker, additionally, even in the public sector, the government of Ghana, under the leadership of the Akufo-Addo administration, ensured that at least about 300,000 young Ghanaians were recruited in the public sector, both for those who are paid by the Comptroller and Accountant General and for those from the non-subvented agencies. Mr. Speaker, this is very different from the days when we were told that because we were down to the bone and had gone to the IMF, we could not recruit people in the public sector. But what is even more exciting, Mr. Speaker, is that in this 2022 budget, the administration has made available 1 billion Ghana cedis to support young men and women in this republic who want to embark upon their own business, known as the You Start Initiative. And so, Mr. Speaker, the most important issue on the minds of Ghanaians is being answered by this administration by expanding the private sector. And if you look at the forecast of growth in the year 2022, we as an administration are forecasting 5.8% growth. The International Monetary Fund, from where my friends get policy credibility, says that they project that we will hit 6.2% growth. That expansion is expansion that will create a lot more jobs in the private sector. The continued expansion in the public sector will create jobs in the public sector. And then the 1 billion Ghana cedis that we are making available to young Ghanaians will also help us create at least about 1 million jobs in the next 3 years in the private sector here in Ghana. And so the most important question, unemployment, is answered by this 2022 budget, Mr. Speaker. Right Honorable Speaker, every Friday when we come to this chamber, you field questions, majority of them coming from my colleagues on the other side. And a good number of those questions have to do with infrastructure and roads. The second reason for which I say we should support this policy is because this economic policy forecast a huge expansion in the investment in infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, if you go to the appendices, in the year, and my colleagues are asking me where, I will draw their attention. In the year 2021, capital expenditure was 12 billion Ghana cedis. 12 billion. And even after forecasting and spending about 12 billion, every day we see demonstrations in all our constituencies asking for more roads. Every day we see calls on government to spend more for infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, the government has responded by making available in the 2022 budget 16 billion Ghana cedis for infrastructure. This is another reason for which all of us must support this economic policy. You cannot be a member of parliament who tells your constituents that I am going to Accra to fight for infrastructure for you. And when you come to parliament and the government says, I am moving from 12 billion to 16 billion on infrastructure, you say, no, I won't go for it. How can you go for it? And so, Mr. Speaker, the second reason for which we should support this is because this budget, unlike any budget in our history in this republic, forecast the most amount of money to fund infrastructure in this country. And I believe that is why all of us, majority, minority, must support this economic policy which is before us today, Mr. Speaker. Right Honorable Speaker, the third reason for which we should support this economic policy is because it lays out a clear path for boosting local industry. Right from the days of O-level economics, one of the arguments has been to develop the economy, we must do import substitution. Mr. Speaker, we live in an economy where a good number of the things that are consumed are imported. In the last 3 to 4 years, we have made a lot of investment in supporting local industry. The administration has put before this House a policy that says that we will keep the benchmark values that have been discounted. We will keep it. However, for some 40 products which we produce here in Ghana, it will not be in our interest to continue discounting duties on them. Mr. Speaker, I want to ask my colleagues in this chamber some simple questions, and maybe we can help ourselves answer and use that to take a decision. Does it serve us well that we continue to discount the duties on poultry products? No. And that is why the policy is before this House that we should reverse the discounting of duties on poultry products. Mr. Speaker, should we continue to discount the duties on rice? No. That is why the policy is before us that we should reverse it. Mr. Speaker, palm oil. I come from a constituency where our women produce a lot of palm oil. Today, we are discounting the importation or the duty of palm oil. Mr. Speaker, does it serve us well? Does it serve our conscience well? No. That we continue to discount the duties of palm oil? No. That is why we have been asked to reverse this policy. Toilet paper. Chocolate, Mr. Speaker. Cocoa is the backbone of this economy. Chocolate is one of the things that we are pushing to have higher production. Should we continue to discount import duties on chocolate? No. Mr. Speaker, water. Bottled water. When people produce water in this country, and we continue to discount the duties on water, does it serve our conscience well? No. Tomato paste and ketchup. Should we continue to discount the duties on tomato paste and ketchup? No. How about furniture? Mr. Speaker, our local carpenters are asking for an opportunity to supply some more. Does it serve us well that we sit in this chamber? Mr. Speaker, does it serve us well that we sit in this chamber and say we should continue to discount duties on furniture? No. That is why the executive has brought to this hallowed chamber a request that we reverse the discount of the duties on these about 40 products. My humble prayer is that if we really support local industry, now is the time to support this economic policy that is before us, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one of the things that we are grappling with is debt. The chairman of the Finance Committee gave us a trajectory of our debt management over the years. Mr. Speaker, I heard my colleague, the Honorable Atuforsen, seek to use the CD-denominated debt as a standard for analysis. I always say to him that the CD-denominated debt will mislead you, because if your debt is $100 million at an exchange rate of $1 is to 1 CD, like President Kufuor left us, the first day your CD-denominated debt is 100 million cedis. Mr. Speaker, if the exchange rate slips to 1.5, the next day it is 150 million cedis. Does it mean you've borrowed more? No! And so this CD-denominated debt analysis will mislead you. Mr. Speaker, the most important thing to examine are the debt sustainability indicators. And those debt sustainability indicators, Mr. Speaker, the most important one year to year that we must watch is the deficit. Right, Honorable Speaker, it was in this hallowed chamber that we all agreed that never again should an administration, without cause and without prior approval, go beyond 5% deficit. And in the first set of years of this administration, we demonstrated fulfillment to that. Yeah. Because of COVID, we went up to 11.7%. Mr. Speaker, if you read this budget, it is clear that we are bringing the fiscal deficit down to 7.9 in this 2022 year. We take it down to about 6 and bring it down to the fiscal responsibility limit of 5% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, that is the clearest evidence that this administration is committed to reducing the debt burden on this country. That is a policy that I believe this House must support. We cannot in one breath say we want to see a reduction in our debt burden. Yet when we put before you a policy proposal that let us reduce the deficit from 11 to 7.9, you say no, I will support it. How can that be? So, Mr. Speaker, we must all support this economic policy proposal that says that we want to reduce the deficit from 11 to 7, from 7 to 6, and 6 to 5 eventually during the lifetime of this administration. Mr. Speaker, my very final point is that this economic policy before us also proposes a common platform for mobilization of property rates. Mr. Speaker, if you did an audit of how many of us as members of parliament pay property rates and pay what we should really be paying, you may be surprised, Mr. Speaker. We know that property rates are not being collected in the right measure across our country. That is why this economic policy before us outlines a measure by which the central government will collect property rates and use the same property rate to develop our country. If we know that this is the problem and a solution has been put before us, I believe what we need to do, Mr. Speaker, is for all of us to support this economic policy before us so that we can mobilize property rates, not an increase in the rates, not a new tax, but those property rates for this purpose. Mr. Speaker, additionally, talking of revenue, this administration has proposed a more efficient and equitable way of raising revenue, that is the e-levy. Mr. Speaker, we say the system is working elsewhere. We want to see development in our country like elsewhere. But tax to GDP, Mr. Speaker, is only 12%. And we ourselves say that the informal sector is not paying much. We need to raise more revenue in an equitable manner, but protect the poor. That is why we have ensured that the first 100 Ghana cedis, which means 2,000 cedis a month, is not taxed. But subsequently, those who can afford are taxed. Mr. Speaker, as I round up, I want to call on every single one of the 275 members of this House. These are economic policy prescriptions that we must all support. We must support them because they are the answers to the questions on our minds. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity.
Statement and economic policy of government for the year 2022. Mr. Speaker, before 1995, our understanding of development was that of economic growth. And so all the development efforts, budget statements, and economic policies of government were geared towards making sure that the economy grows using the indicators of GDP and so on. The Speaker, post 1995, the world agreed that the true meaning of development must be construed in a way that we must pursue economic development in a way that is socially acceptable and environmentally sustainable. And that is how come we came to the Millennium Development Goals, and subsequently we came to the Sustainable Development Goals. And indeed, if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, Mr. Speaker, you realize that at least 9 of them speak to the issues of environmental sustainability. And therefore, there cannot be any serious budget of any government that does not speak to the issues of how we protect our environment, safeguard our environment, and make sure that we are building a resilient environment. And so, Mr. Speaker, I would like to dwell my contribution to the 2022 budget on the area of environment. In addition to, indeed, the impressive economic performance and the impressive economic proposals that government has presented to this Honorable House. Mr. Speaker, paragraph 249, in my view, summarizes the spirit of this budget as far as the centrality of climate change to economic growth and prosperity is concerned. And if you may permit me, Mr. Speaker, I would like to highlight that the economic policies that have been proposed by government, the overall effect is that we are closing the fiscal deficit, moving the primary deficit to a surplus, and also reducing the wage bill to tax revenue from 50 to 38% in just 1 year. This indeed is an impressive economic record. But in addition to that, if you look at paragraph 447 to 470, Mr. Speaker, this budget has a number of policy statements that is related to environmental sustainability and climate change in particular. And Mr. Speaker, I don't believe that there is any budget in the Fourth Republic that has paid much attention to the issue of environmental sustainability than the 2022 budget of Nana Dankwa Akufo-Addo. Mr. Speaker, I believe when you peruse page 447 to 470, you would see that a number of policy statements have been made to make sure that we are safeguarding and protecting and building a resilient environment. But my interest this morning, Mr. Speaker, is on the issue of how we are translating the policy commitments that we have made and the policy rhetoric into practice, and how government will be able to implement the various actions that we have proposed in this budget. And Mr. Speaker, I would like to refer you to paragraph 471 of the budget statement. Mr. Speaker, 471 and 472 speak to an important intervention by government in respect of financing, making provision for the financing of our environmental programs. Mr. Speaker, there is a climate public expenditure institutional review, and this review was conducted by a joint team of UNDP ODA using public expenditure review methodology, which is a rigorous methodology that is used to investigate public financing of particular programs. And in this case, we are talking about how government has financed environment for the past 5 years. And Mr. Speaker, the interesting data is provided in paragraph 472 that we may have to avert our mind to. And it says, Mr. Speaker, if I may read, that, Mr. Speaker, the study indicated that over the last 5 years, that is between 2015 to 2020, Ghana has spent 14.5 billion on various climate change interventions. And this, Mr. Speaker, constitutes almost 4% of total expenditure. A more interesting aspect of this data is that the lead institution, agencies, and ministries, i.e., the Ministry of Environment, Science, Technology and Innovation, Sanitation and Water Resources, Fisheries and Aquaculture, Lands and Natural Resources, Gender, have committed more than 30% of their total expenditure to climate change. And Mr. Speaker, this data gives us hope that the policy response that have been provided in this budget will receive or can receive financing from this government. It shows that this government is serious about the environment, and that even though we are required to look for some 57 billion cedis to implement our nationally determined contributions within the period of 2020 to 2030, the provision in 472 gives us the indication that indeed government has made a substantial commitment, and that the requirement of 5.7 billion per year to finance our environment program is something that is already, in my view, within reach. And Mr. Speaker, particularly if you look at paragraph 457 and 465, 466, already this budget statement points to some proposals to tap into the Green Climate Fund and also to use the mechanism of carbon markets to be able to leverage additional funding to finance Ghana's climate response program. Already, Mr. Speaker, we already have 24 million tons of carbon dioxide available for the carbon market that we can use to finance our carbon program. Mr. Speaker, in addition to these impressive environmental policies, I would like to also talk about the need for EPA's role to be recognized, for EPA to be an authority as we progress as a country, building more industries and expanding the frontiers of our settlement. Mr. Speaker, we are assured in paragraph 797 that the EPA will continue to enforce the environmental protection laws of this country. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, if you look at the role that EPA is playing vis-a-vis the increasing number of human settlements and industries that we envisage to build, it is important that EPA position itself as an authority that will be able to bring its powers to bear on the challenges that may emerge as we progress and as we grow the economy. Mr. Speaker, another impressive policy that I would like to talk about is captured in paragraph 794, where we are talking about the progress that Ghana is making as far as our ambition towards nuclear power and nuclear energy is concerned. Mr. Speaker, in paragraph 794, the progress that we have made has been elaborated, and I believe that we are progressing towards the generation of nuclear energy to supplement and, if you like, help us to move towards a low-carbon energy economy. And Mr. Speaker, I would like to also come to the issue of the support that government gives to the promotion of science and technology development in this country. Certainly, we know that the poverty gap is a technology gap, and increasingly we have been advocating for government and successive governments to pay attention to the development of science and technology. And Mr. Speaker, if you look at the provisions in paragraph 792, two interesting issues are captured that are of relevance to mention, even as we are talking about environmental sustainability and the development of scientific innovation. Mr. Speaker, the first one is the progress that we have
shown restraints. But I must commend the Ministry of Finance for its work thus far. And I'm hoping as we make decisions about the budget, we'll keep one key thing in mind, that the Almighty God gave us this land, that we take very good care of it. And in as such, every decision made that impacts our environment also largely impacts our health. Pardon me for my voice. I know that the budget addresses in every way our needs, considering the time that we're in. Many of us cannot discount the fact that our health care through the environment has impacted businesses largely. So I need to use this opportunity to stress the fact that as we consider the budget for 2022, we bear in mind that key thing, that without cleanliness, without deliberate attention to the climate, without deliberate attention to the connection between our environment, our health, and productivity, we'll be making a very serious error. I'll plead with all and sundry that in as much as we work hard to ensure that the budget is passed, we consider each day the impact of our decisions in this House. And without a shred of doubt in my mind, financial institutions across the world are working vigorously to see how they can finance projects that maintain our water bodies, projects that maintain good sanitation, projects that, if we agree on, can help us maintain our wonderful standard of life in Ghana and in the world at large. The scale of planning, as seen in the budget by our various governmental institutions, have brought to bear one key thing, that times, certainly worldwide, are hard. And I think it is one thing that cannot be disputed, regardless of your party position, regardless of your religious affiliation. And I'm here to talk also for one wonderful agency on the environment, which is the Environmental Protection Agency, and the need to strengthen it, as stated in the budget. Because as we're moving towards industrialization, and may I repeat, industrialization comes with, of course, its challenges of climate impact. In that regard, I think that more needs to be done on our environmental needs, and we need to let our money show. We need to let our finances, as it is, empower our environmental programs in the country. I am privileged to be one of the few that sat in the Global Climate Conference. And in fact, in as much as I went with an objective mind, I learned a lot. And one thing is clear: global challenges in terms of climate challenges are affecting us. And unfortunately, we are not very well prepared because of our drainage challenges in this country. Flooding, as we all know, not to mention, when the dams are open and all these challenges we have in this country, stresses the fact that infrastructure development is largely tied to our environmental health and wealth. And this budget, as done by the Financial Ministry, has brought to light the need for us to levy in a way and not necessarily borrow to fund very key environmental projects in this country. And for that matter, I think the average ordinary Ghanaian will be in support of this approach by government to levy and to allow people to use their earnings to support government initiatives. It is about time, pardon me, it's about time that we limit our developmental projections to how much we can raise within our home, Mother Ghana. I'll plead that as we give consideration to this budget as members of Parliament, that we do this with the appropriate intent, that we make Ghana the ultimate agenda, not any party's agenda. We should all have that one common interest of protecting our environment. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, we appreciate your efforts to make sure that Parliament is well also represented, as you stated, in the budget. I need to use this opportunity to thank you for that. And in as much as you fight for Parliament, we'll extend that invitation to you, to also fight for our environment and ensure that all the budgetary needs of our environmental agencies are met, such that allocation for capital investments are also met. And I'm hoping that as we work towards appropriation, once again, our most important concern is to have a common ground when it comes to our environmental challenges. Because the environmental challenges have no colors. Our environmental challenges have no party. When it floods in Peki or any part of this country, when it floods in Anyansotum or any part of this country, it goes to all homes. It doesn't go to any particular religious home or party home. It affects all of us. So in conclusion, my plea again is that considering all of our challenges, when it comes to our environmental needs, as clearly put out by our financial ministry, that we pay the necessary price and we agree to people being levied in support of governmental initiatives that are going to be to all of us our benefit. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield the rest of my time.
to our west, Côte d'Ivoire. We've positioned ourselves, Mr. Speaker, to play a role that helps our neighbors secure themselves, and most importantly helps us protect our sovereignty and protect our human security. Mr. Speaker, on the economic front, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has championed the ACFA program by ensuring its establishment and the setup of its headquarters in Accra, Ghana, and championed the protocols of trade in goods, protocols on trade in service, protocols on investment, and the policy on competition within the AFTA program to ensure that Ghanaians benefit immensely from the program. Mr. Speaker, the AFTA program is a thought-through one, full of benefits, and the policy being supervised by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Trade. Mr. Speaker, on the second front of championing diplomacy, our President, Mr. Speaker, is ensuring that our state is fully protected from the issues of terrorism through diplomacy with our neighbors. Mr. Speaker, let me remind the House that in the last 1 year, we've had 700 terrorist incidents in the neighborhood. 3,000 lives have been lost in the sub-region. The President signed the agreement, and this House passed the early warning mechanism system to allow for West African states to share information to protect our human security. Mr. President, we came to this House at our last sitting and passed a bill that set up the early warning center in this country. And that is how serious this government, led by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, is taking the issue of terrorism to protect Ghanaians and members of the ECOWAS sub-region. Mr. Speaker, our President, your President, the number one. Number two. Mr. Speaker, our President, your President, the number one, has been reappointed as the chair of ECOWAS. And in his capacity, he's championing the realignment of the statutory positions for countries in the member states. Pretty much, when ECOWAS was set up, every country had some positions that they had to occupy. But this was skewed in favor of certain countries. And since he became chairman of the ECOWAS Commission, he's been mandated to realign to ensure that member states benefit from these statutory positions. He's also been mandated, Mr. Speaker, and the economic policy supports that, to ensure that the cost of the the ECOWAS agencies are brought to bearable levels in this pandemic era. Mr. President, Mr. Speaker, our President is in a hurry. He travels quite a lot. And anytime our President travels, he comes home with goodies. Mr. President, Mr. Speaker, our President visited the European Union and came home with 170 million euros. Mr. Speaker, our President visited Germany and came home with COVID vaccines. Anytime our President travels, Mr. President, he comes home with goodies. To the extent that these travels of the president are always reciprocated. Mr. Speaker, we had a visit of His Excellency Simonette Samoriga, who visited Ghana, Right Honorable Priti Patel, UK Home Secretary, Honorable James Hepe, UK Minister for the Armed Forces, amongst others, visited the Republic as a sign of the good works of our President. Mr. Speaker, the vehicle that the President travels in is inconsequential in these matters for as long as we want to play politics with it. Mr. President, in my capacity as a Member of Parliament with some knowledge on security matters, Mr. Speaker, I have advised the Minister for National Security to continue to keep the information on the presidential travels secret, and if he may, lift it to top secret, because it is not every information that can be divulged to the public. Hitherto, it was confidential, that could be shared. Now it has been classified as secret, and I have encouraged him to increase the security level to top secret, because that information is not one that can be played in the political arena. Mr. Speaker, in 2022, the outlook for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is quite straightforward. We will continue to implement the policies that the President has set forth, that we as a country, we align properly with our neighbors. We take seriously the matters of ECOWAS. We play our role and continue to strengthen our role in the international community and ensure that we support the security sectors in triangulating the security matters in the West African region. Mr. Speaker, the economic policy directs the ministry to use its efforts in diplomacy to ensure that the economic sectors are supported to bring investment, jobs, and economic integration in the African sub-region. Mr. Speaker, we know what it costs. We know what it costs to do something. What we do not know is the cost to do nothing. Mr. Speaker, this economic policy has the necessary interventions to bring relief in these COVID times to Ghanaians, and I urge my colleagues on the other side to support it, to complete, consolidate, and continue the growth and progress of our motherland. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Either we approve this budget so that it becomes a foundation upon which this Parliament can consider the individual request for revenue mobilization measures and individual resource allocation measures the government is seeking and has demonstrated in this budget. That would be one choice. Mr. Speaker, we also have a choice to vote against this motion and reject the budget so that in respect of the 2022 budget statement, there will be nothing before us. That would mean the government will need to go back and begin a fresh process of preparing a new budget, bring it back to this House, let this House debate the budget, pass the estimates, pass the appropriation, all within 5 weeks. Mr. Speaker, even now that the budget has been presented to us, we are racing against time. And so, Mr. Speaker, those who have suggested that we have an option to reject this budget clearly are telling us what is out of place. And I urge this House to approve this budget and give this House the opportunity to consider the elements within the budget. If we didn't do that, and by the 1st of January 2022, There is no approved appropriation. Public sector workers cannot be paid. Government cannot honor its international obligations, and we would throw this country into chaos. Let those saying we should reject the budget repent of what they are thinking about. But Mr. Speaker, this is not the only reason we should approve this budget. This budget is seeking boldly to deal with a problem, a chronic problem that has affected Ghana's economy for a long time. Mr. Speaker, I've gone into our budget statements beginning from 2006 when the current series for GDP began. I have taken the revenues we are able to mobilize as a country. I have taken the interest payments, not the payment of loans, the repayment of loans, but interest payment, the money, the interest we have to repay on the loans. I have taken them from 2006. Mr. Speaker, what I am looking to demonstrate to this House, what has been happening to the widening gap between our revenues and our expenditures. Because how much we are spending on interest payment is a direct reflection of how we are spending money that we do not have and how we are borrowing to finance that gap. So Speaker, in 2006, for every 100 cedis that we collected as revenue, both tax and non-tax revenue, for every 100 cedis, we used 16 cedis to pay interest on our loans. That was in 2006. In 2007, thanks to the HAPIC initiative, it dropped to 12 cedis. So for every 100 cedis we collected as revenue in 2007, we used 12 cedis to pay the interest on the monies we had borrowed. Mr. Speaker, in 2008, under the NPP administration, after we had exited HAPIC, you see clearly that the debt was beginning to rise again, right under the NPP administration. So in 2008, for every 100 cedis we collected, Mr. Speaker, we used 14 cedis. We had climbed up from 12 cedis, 14 cedis, to pay the interest on the monies we had borrowed. Mr. Speaker, in 2012, getting to the close of the Mills administration, for every 100 cedis we collected, we now use 16 cedis to service our debt by way of interest payments. Mr. Speaker, that was what President Mama inherited. By 2016, when the Mama administration was leaving office, for every 100 cedis we collected as revenue, we were now using 33 cedis to finance our interest. Mr. Speaker, I would proceed to provide the figures for the current administration. They are not necessarily pleasant, but Mr. Speaker, I am painting this picture to let us understand the problem this budget is seeking to deal with and why the interventions under this budget would have to be supported. Mr. Speaker, it is not as though, I'll provide the figures shortly. Mr. Speaker, it is not as though we have not averted our minds to this. In early 2013, President Mama came to this house, Mr. Speaker, and told us that the meat was now down to the bone. So we knew. In 2015, I prefer to believe, Mr. Speaker, that President Mama did his best. But Mr. Speaker, what his best produced Mr. Speaker, made a decision to seek an IMF bailout because we did not have policy credibility. This is the language of the government when it sought a bailout under the IMF program in 2015. Mr. Speaker, we exited the IMF program in 2018, but a little over a year later, our economy was hit by a global pandemic. Mr. Speaker, I have had the occasion to remind us that under that pandemic, not only did we have to borrow to finance expenditures that we had not planned for, because of the pandemic, revenues that we had programmed into our budget just did not come because the global economy had been shut down. Mr. Speaker, every country was badly hit by that, and so was Ghana. So that, as we can all clearly see, our debt to GDP ratio, Mr. Speaker, has risen. And that takes us to what we are using to service our debt in 2020 and in 2021. Mr. Speaker, in 2020, for every 100 cedis we collected as revenue, we now use 45 cedis to service our loans and to pay interest on the monies we have borrowed. Mr. Speaker, I'm looking at the 2021 projected outturn because we are not at the end of the year yet. And this is likely to climb to 47 cedis being used to pay interest for every 100 cedis that we collect as revenue. Mr. Speaker, we must ask ourselves as a people, is this sustainable? Is the trend we have seen under the previous government, the trend we are seeing now, Mr. Speaker, is that sustainable? Of course it is not. And it is the reason government has taken the bold step under this budget to deal with what has been a chronic difficulty of this economy. Mr. Speaker, that is why I invite this House to support not just the policies of this government, of this budget, but also to support the interventions within the budget to deal with a problem that has been bedeviling our economy in the past and present. So, Mr. Speaker, I do agree that to deal with the difference between our revenues, the widening gap between our revenues and expenditures, the adverse gap should not just be on the revenue side. We need to take steps also to deal with our expenditures. And Mr. Speaker, that is why I am glad to see the paragraphs of the budget we have been invited to consider. Paragraph 322 to 332, where some measures have been outlined to deal with the rising expenditure against our revenues. And Mr. Speaker, I will mention a few of them. Government is inviting us to approve an initiative to move away from sole sourcing to more competitive tendering contracts. Mr. Speaker, this is a good initiative. We need to support it. Mr. Speaker, government is looking to improve efficiency of public sector projects financing by tightening the value for money regime of government projects in accordance with the law we passed recently. Mr. Speaker, this again is an expenditure control intervention that we must support. government is seeking, again, Mr. Speaker, to abolish post-retirement contracts and step up payroll cleanup and rationalization. Again, Mr. Speaker, this is an expenditure control measure we should support. Government again is seeking to apply gift-mates to cut down unauthorized commitments made across the economy, adding to our arrears and worsening the gap between our revenues and our expenditures. Again, Mr. Speaker, this is something we should support. I see again a commitment by government to cut back on the exemptions we give in this economy. And as I speak, Mr. Speaker, we are aware that the exemptions bill 2021 has been laid in this House. Mr. Speaker, these are the interventions government is asking us for approval for. But, Mr. Speaker, I proceed by saying, as Parliament, not only should we be approving and supporting government in these initiatives, Mr. Speaker, we as Parliament must also lead by example. Are there ways, Mr. Speaker, are there ways the leadership of Parliament can cut costs as Ghana seeks to bridge the gap between our revenues and expenditures? Mr. Speaker, are there ways that this House we can lead by the example? The Speaker reminds us all the time that we are the representatives of the people. Mr. Speaker, Parliament should not just oversight the executive, we must lead by example. Mr. Speaker, sole sourcing in parliamentary procurement. Are we going to deal with sole sourcing procurement by this House? Is this something as a House we would like to not just oversight the executive? Is this something that we should do? Mr. Speaker, should we continue, for example, to procure these glossy calendars and glossy diaries year on year for Parliament, for which we have very little utilization? Mr. Speaker, it is not enough for members of Parliament to be out there calling out the executive and asking the executive to demonstrate commitment to fiscal prudence. We ourselves must set the example. Mr. Speaker, I must go on. I can go on and on and on. But I pause here. Mr. Speaker, we can even add, Mr. Speaker, that it is time to cap the number of members of Parliament for the Republic of Ghana. It is time to cap this House. We cannot continue administration after administration, be creating districts, be creating constituencies, be creating more members of Parliament, and to be increasing the budget. I am inviting my colleagues on the other side that we have come to a point where we need to call the spade a spade. Let us be committed to the things we are saying. Let us not just pretend that imposition of taxes is against the interests of the people, and therefore we side with the people, and we pretend that we will be out there supporting the people and rejecting government initiatives to deal with the gap, when we ourselves know that on our side we do not want to lead by example. And as our colleagues from the other side get up to speak to this budget, Mr. Speaker, it will be helpful if we can demonstrate to the public that now this is a new Parliament, as the Speaker told us in Ho, that this is a new Parliament. We must be partners with government in cutting costs and in raising revenue. Under no circumstance should we pretend that it is the job of just the executive to cut costs? My solemn appeal to my colleagues of this House this morning as we consider this debate. It is, let us, for the love of our country, let us, for the concern we have for the economy of this country, let us approve this budget. Let us approve the interventions in the budget, and let us deal with a problem that has bedeviled our economy for so long. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.